I don't even know where to begin. My name is Ryan, and I'm 31 years old. For years, I thought I was doing the right thing by taking care of my family. But looking back now, I feel like a complete fool. I grew up in a modest household. My parents worked hard, but we never really had much. My younger brother, Jake, was always a bit of a dreamer. The kind of kid who floated through life, never really landing anywhere. I, on the other hand, was determined to change our circumstances. Through grit and perseverance, I earned a full scholarship to college, graduated at the top of my class, and landed a solid job in finance. Things took off from there. Within a few years, I was making six figures, a fact my parents were proud of, almost too proud. They called me their golden boy, the one who'd finally pulled the family out of the trenches. The thing is, I wanted to help them. I started sending my parents $4,500 every month, no strings attached. It wasn't a formal agreement or anything. I just wanted them to live comfortably. Jake, who was 27 at the time and still living with them, didn't have a job. My parents always defended him. "He's finding himself," they'd say, brushing off my concerns like dust from a table. For years, I accepted this narrative. Jake was the family's wild card, the one who needed time to figure things out. I had no reason to believe otherwise, at least not until the first cracks began to show. 2 years ago, I started noticing unusual charges on my credit card. I had given my parents an extra card for emergencies, but the purchases weren't emergencies. They were indulgences. Designer clothes, high-end electronics, luxury dining. When I confronted my mom about it, she waved it off like it was nothing. "Jake needed a few things," she said. "You know how hard it is for him right now." I let it go at first. I trusted them. But the charges didn't stop. They only escalated. And after a while, I couldn't ignore them anymore. It's wild how you can look at something over and over and not see what's right in front of you. That's how it felt when I finally sat down and went through my credit card statements. I mean, really went through them, line by line. What I saw floored me. Over the years, Jake had racked up $183,000 in charges. $183,000. That wasn't even counting the $4,500 a month I'd been sending to my parents. When I added it all up, I'd given them over $370,000 in 7 years. $500,000 gone, just like that. I tried to wrap my head around it, but no matter how I looked at it, it felt like a betrayal. I wasn't mad about helping my family. That's what you do when you're in a position to help. But this wasn't helping. This was abuse. I confronted them again. I went to their house, credit card statements in hand, and laid everything out. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "How could you let this happen?" My dad wouldn't even look at me. He just stared at the floor like a scolded child. "My mom?" She doubled down. "Ryan," she said, her tone all righteous indignation. "He's your brother. Family takes care of family. You have the money, don't you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked over at Jake, who was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone like nothing was happening. He didn't even flinch. He just muttered, "What's the big deal? You're rich." That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't miscommunication or a misunderstanding. They didn't see me as their son or their brother. They saw me as a walking ATM, and they didn't even have the decency to hide it. I snapped. "You think this is okay?" I shouted. "You think it's fine to steal from me because I make good money? Do you even hear yourselves?" My mom started crying, playing the victim like she always did. "You're selfish," she sobbed. "After everything we've done for you, you're just going to abandon us?" "Done for me?" I shot back. "You didn't pay for my education. I got scholarships. I worked for everything I have. And now you're telling me I owe you?" Jake finally looked up. "You don't have to be such a jerk about it," he said, rolling his eyes. I was done. I told them the credit card was canceled, effective immediately, and the monthly payments were stopping too. I wasn't going to bankroll their lifestyle anymore. My mom screamed that I was cruel. My dad muttered something about family loyalty, and Jake just walked out of the room. I left, shaking with anger, and something else. Something deeper. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that they didn't care about me. Not really. A week later, I got a call from my bank. My parents had tried to open a new credit card in my name. When the bank called, I was still reeling from everything that had happened. My phone lit up with an unknown number, and I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Mr. Ryan Summers?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "This is Greg from Bank of Trust. We flagged a suspicious application for a credit card under your name. It appears to have been submitted recently." I felt my stomach drop. "That's impossible," I said. "I didn't apply for a new card." "Well," Greg continued, "we have the application here, and the details match your account. Would you like us to send over a copy for verification?" I didn't even need to see it to know what had happened, but I asked for the copy anyway. A few hours later, the email came through. Sure enough, there it was. My name, my social security number, my signature, except it wasn't my signature. I confronted my parents that same night. I drove straight to their house, my anger barely contained. When my mom opened the door, she had that fake sweet smile she always used when she knew she'd done something wrong, but didn't want to admit it. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I barked, waving my phone with the emailed application in her face. Her expression didn't even flicker. "Ryan, calm down. What's this about?" "You tried to open a credit card in my name," I yelled. She sighed like I was being dramatic. "We were just trying to keep things going, Ryan. You cut us off so suddenly. What were we supposed to do?" I couldn't believe the audacity. How about getting a job? Or, I don't know, not stealing from me? "We're your family," she said, her tone icy now. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us. You're turning your back on us when we need you most." Before I could respond, my dad chimed in from the living room. "It's not like you can't afford it, Ryan. You've always been the provider. That's your role in this family." His words hit me like a slap. Provider, not son, not brother, just provider. "I'm done," I said, my voice shaking. "Do you understand me? I am done. I'm filing a fraud report. And if you ever pull something like this again, I'll press charges." My mom gasped like I'd just threatened to burn the house down. "How could you even say that? We're your parents. Your father and I sacrificed so much for you." "Sacrifices?" I shot back. "Name one." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. That was it, the final straw. I left, slamming the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was seeing my family clearly. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I could give them. And now that the well had run dry, they were willing to cross any line to keep their lifestyle going. But the nightmare wasn't over. You'd think after filing a fraud report against my own parents, things couldn't possibly get worse. I thought the same. Turns out, I was wrong. A few weeks after cutting them off, I got another call from the bank. This time, it was about a $98,000 charge attempt at a high-end jewelry store in New York. My stomach dropped. I'd already canceled every card they had access to. How was this even possible? I told the bank it wasn't me and had them freeze my account immediately. But now I was paranoid. How far were they willing to go? I requested a full breakdown of my recent transactions. As I combed through the list, my hands started to shake. There was another $85,000 in charges over the past 6 months. Luxury hotels, international tours, 5-star restaurants. My parents and Jake had been living it up on my dime while I was working 60-hour weeks to keep their ship afloat. I called every hotel and restaurant listed on those charges. Most of them confirmed that the bookings were made in Jake's name or under my parents' contact information. One hotel manager told me they'd stayed in a penthouse suite for a week, racking up a $22,000 bill. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. When I confronted them this time, it wasn't just the usual excuses and guilt trips. My mom snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. "We deserve nice things too, Ryan. You've been living your fancy life while we've been struggling. You wouldn't even have this life if it weren't for us." "Struggling?" I shot back. "Struggling doesn't look like penthouse suites and designer handbags." Jake, lounging on the couch as usual, smirked. "It's not like you're broke, Ryan. Why does it matter how we spent it?" His casual indifference made my blood boil. "It matters because it's my money," I said, practically shouting. "You didn't earn it. You didn't even ask for it. You just took it." Jake rolled his eyes. You're acting like we robbed a bank or something. Chill out. Are you serious right now? I snapped. Do you even hear yourself? You've been freeloading off me for years, and you don't even care. My dad finally chimed in, trying to sound reasonable, but only making things worse. Ryan, we're your family. Family helps each other out. You've always been the successful one. It's just your role. I stared at him, speechless. My role. Like I'd been cast in some twisted play where my only purpose was to bankroll their lives? That same night, I started getting calls from unknown numbers. One guy claimed to be a debt collector, saying I owed $45,000 for a loan I'd supposedly co-signed. I told him he must have the wrong person, but he insisted. Panicked, I pulled my credit report, and there it was, a loan taken out 3 months earlier with my forged signature. My parents had done it again. This time I didn't hesitate. I filed a police report. I didn't want to believe it had come to this, but I couldn't let them keep dragging me down. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about protecting myself. The fallout was immediate. When the police contacted my parents, my mom called me, hysterical. "How could you do this to us?" she screamed. "We're your family. You're going to ruin us, Ryan." "No," I replied, my voice cold. "You ruined yourselves." Jake left me a voicemail that night, cursing me out and blaming me for everything. He called me selfish, heartless, a wannabe big shot who cared more about money than family. I blocked his number. For the first time in my life, I felt free. But freedom came with its own weight. Guilt, anger, sadness. How had it come to this? The thing about cutting people off is that it feels liberating at first. You tell yourself, this is it. I'm free. But the reality is messier than that. It didn't take long for the consequences of my decision to ripple through my family. Jake was the first to feel it. With no access to my money and his own financial recklessness catching up to him, the debt collectors didn't just call. They started taking action. One evening, I got a text from my cousin, Sam. "Did you hear about Jake?" I hadn't, but I had a feeling I was about to. Sam told me Jake was being sued by one of the debt collection agencies. Apparently, they'd filed a lawsuit, and Jake, being Jake, hadn't bothered to show up to court. The judgment came down hard. He was ordered to repay the full amount he owed, plus interest and legal fees. A week later, I heard from Sam again. "Jake's car got repossessed," he said. "I think he lost his job, too." I didn't feel much sympathy. Jake had been working as a delivery driver, and without his car, he couldn't keep the job. From what Sam told me, he started couch surfing at friends' places, but that didn't last long. Even his closest buddies eventually got tired of his freeloading. The last I heard, Jake was staying at a shelter. My parents didn't fare much better. Without my monthly payments to cover the mortgage, they fell behind fast. I found out through Sam that they'd tried to refinance the house, but their credit was shot. It wasn't long before the bank foreclosed on the property. I didn't hear this from them, of course. My mom wasn't about to call me and admit that the house, the home I grew up in, was gone. Instead, Sam sent me a picture of their new place, a small rundown apartment on the edge of town. The mismatched furniture, the bare walls. It was a far cry from the pristine house my mom used to brag about. I should have felt some satisfaction. After all, they'd brought this on themselves. But all I felt was a dull, empty ache. Jake, on the other hand, wasn't done trying to rope me back in. One night, out of nowhere, he called me from a friend's phone. "Ryan," he said, his voice low and desperate. "I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but I'm in a really bad spot right now. Can't you just help me out one last time?" His words hit something deep inside me. Despite everything, he was still my brother, but I couldn't go back. "Jake," I said quietly, "I've given you so many chances. You've burned through every single one. You need to figure this out on your own." His tone shifted immediately. "Are you serious?" he snapped. "You're just going to leave me like this, after everything I've done for you?" I laughed bitterly. "What exactly have you done for me, Jake?" The line went silent for a moment before he exploded. "You're such a selfish piece of shit. You think you're better than me because you've got money? Screw you, Ryan. You're the reason this family's falling apart." I hung up. That was the last time I heard from Jake. My parents, meanwhile, tried a different approach. Guilt. My mom left me a voicemail one evening, her voice trembling with just the right mix of sadness and bitterness. "Ryan," she began, "your father and I don't understand how you could do this to us. After all we've sacrificed for you, after everything we've done, you've abandoned us." She went on for a while, but I stopped listening. I deleted the message and blocked her number too. The rest of the family wasn't much better. My mom had twisted the story, painting me as the villain who abandoned my struggling parents. A few aunts and uncles called to scold me, telling me I should be ashamed of myself, but then there was Sam. "They've always been like this," Sam told me one day. "They just hide it better when they think they can get something out of you." Sam had always been the black sheep, the one who didn't play along with the family's manipulative games. He was the only one who truly understood what I was going through. "You did the right thing," he said. "Don't let them drag you back down." His words stuck with me, even on the hardest days, because as much as I hated to admit it, this wasn't just about money. It was about breaking free from a lifetime of guilt and manipulation. Cutting off my family should have been the end of it, but the fallout stuck with me. For years I had shaped my life around their needs, their problems, their expectations. Without that weight, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. The first thing I did was move. I'd been living in a modest condo in the city, a place that felt more like a safe compromise than a home. I realized I'd chosen it to avoid flaunting my success in front of my family, to keep the peace. But now, I wanted something that reflected the life I'd worked so hard to build. After weeks of searching, I found it, a beautiful 3-bedroom house on the edge of town. It was surrounded by trees, with a big backyard and enough space to finally breathe. Moving felt like a fresh start, but it also forced me to confront just how much of my life I'd sacrificed. As I packed, I found old receipts for extravagant gifts I'd bought my parents, photos of vacations I couldn't afford but paid for anyway, even a notebook where I'd written out ways to help Jake find his passion. I was so focused on them that I didn't even know what my passions were. Moving day was bittersweet. My cousin Sam showed up to help, along with his wife, Kara. They were the only family I had left who truly supported me. As we unpacked, Sam handed me a box labeled family stuff. I hesitated before opening it, but when I finally did, it was like staring into a time capsule. Birthday cards from my parents, pictures of Jake and me as kids, little trinkets I'd saved from our old house. It hurt to look at, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it all away. Instead, I taped the box shut and shoved it into the attic. Maybe one day I'd be ready to deal with it, but not yet. For the first time in years, I started focusing on myself. I signed up for yoga classes, something I'd always been curious about but never had time for. I joined a hiking group and discovered a love for the outdoors. And I finally started cooking again, experimenting with recipes in the big sunny kitchen I'd fallen in love with. Therapy became a cornerstone of my new life. My therapist, Dr. Lane, helped me untangle the years of guilt and manipulation I'd carried. She encouraged me to write unsent letters to my family, just to process my feelings. One day I wrote a letter to Jake. In it, I told him how much it hurt to watch him waste his potential, how angry I was that he had taken advantage of me. But I also told him I still hoped he could turn things around. Writing that letter didn't fix anything, but it helped me let go of the bitterness. As time passed, the noise from my family began to fade. Jake was too busy dealing with his own problems to reach out again. My parents stopped trying to contact me directly, but every now and then, I'd hear through Sam that they were still telling anyone who'd listen that I'd abandoned them. The guilt still crept in sometimes, but it was different now. I reminded myself that I'd given them more chances than they deserved. Their choices weren't my responsibility anymore. One day, I ran into an old coworker, Jess, who'd gone through something similar with her own family. Over coffee, she shared how she'd rebuilt her life after cutting them off. "Once you start putting yourself first," she said, "you realize how much lighter life can feel." She was right. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. A few months after I moved, I attended a family gathering for the first time since everything had happened. My parents were there, of course, but we barely acknowledged each other. My mom pulled me aside at one point, her voice cold and sharp. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You've destroyed this family. I didn't respond. What was there to say? For so long, I'd been the glue holding us together. But now I saw the truth. The family had been broken long before I walked away. That night, as I drove home to my new house, I felt a strange sense of peace. The past was still there, still messy, but it didn't control me anymore. Breaking free wasn't easy, and the scars were still healing. But for the first time in a long time, I was hopeful. Not just for the future, but for myself. Story 2. My parents cut me off entirely and supported my dishonest sister, who blamed me for her crime. They are now enraged 6 years later. They weren't invited to my wedding. I'm a man 26-year-old. I considered my family to be rather typical while I was growing up. My dad was employed at a nearby industrial facility. On most weekends, I helped out around the home or played video games while my mother managed a small catering business. I used to be inseparable from my younger sister, who was just a year older than me. But when she blamed me for her own crime 6 years earlier, everything was different. It began when a friend's house was the scene of some thefts. Electronics from the party vanished. A tablet, a phone, and a few expensive devices. My sister confronted me in front of our mother and father the next morning, yelling that she had witnessed me slinking out of a room with some of these things. My sister started crying a lot, but I attempted to explain myself by saying I had nothing to do with it. Telling them that she was caught in the act. She was believed by my parents. She was the baby girl after all. The person who was said to have never lied. However, I ended up being portrayed as a typical thief. The fact that I had an alibi from a few friends was irrelevant. My father barked when I was confronted by the family. Is your sister being accused of lying? My mom gave me a very disappointed look. It seemed unreal. Naturally, I didn't have the stolen items, but they insisted that I return them. I thus had no means of establishing my innocence. The dispute became unmanageable. My sister continued to go into great detail about how she witnessed me searching through purses and coats. Unless I confessed, I was effectively disowned by the end of the night. I wouldn't lie and confess to a crime I hadn't committed. My parents were so upset that they threw me out. My father's face was red with rage as he pointed towards the door. Gather your belongings and leave. You're not my son if you're unable to open up. With her arms folded, my sister watched. Without a trace of regret, they watched the scene play out. I couch-surfed at various friends' houses over the course of the following few months. Half of the town's residents whispered that I was a thief as the story spread. For the sake of maintaining family integrity, my parents informed family members that they were forced to cut me off. My sister, the true offender, got away with it, however. She never once confessed or attempted to correct the record, instead basking in the pity of neighbors who felt sorry for her because she had a criminal brother. I eventually worked odd jobs to save up enough cash to rent a small studio flat a few towns away. Although it wasn't glitzy, it was my place, devoid of drama and accusations. Slowly, I rebuilt my life. I made new friends who didn't think I was a criminal and got a steady job. I didn't hear much from my parents. Now then, I get a text from an aunt or uncle urging me to apologize and come home, but I refused. I wasn't going to grovel for something I never did. That was 6 years ago. Since then, I've managed to carve out a decent life, found someone I love, and move forward. But it turns out that goes from the past. Wasn't quite done. Haunting me because, as I recently discovered, my parents are furious they weren't invited to my wedding. The same parents who disowned me over my sisters lies now believe they deserve a front row seat in my happiest day. A few months ago, I announced my engagement to my fiancée, a warm and funny woman I'd met through a mutual friend. We decided to keep our wedding list small, close friends, some supportive extended relatives, and people who'd stood by us. My parents and sister never crossed my mind as potential invitees. After all, I'd spent the last 6 years with zero support from them. Why would I invite the same people who cast me out? Word got around through social media when we posted our engagement photos. That's when I received a flurry of messages from relatives, some of whom I hadn't heard from since the accusations. A cousin wrote me, "Your father says he's disappointed you haven't invited him. He wants to reconcile." Another message from an uncle said, "You should at least let them comb their family." I felt my jaw tighten as I read these. Where was this rush to reconcile when I was homeless? Labeled a thief? Where was the concern when I needed help to prove my innocence? Now that I'd built a life and was celebrating a milestone, they acted offended for not being in the loop. Still, part of me felt a sting of guilt. Could it be that I was being too harsh? My fiancé, ever the calm voice of reason, suggested if they truly want to make amends, they'd start with an apology. Have they apologized? Of course they hadn't. Instead, they escalated their sense of entitlement. A week later, an aunt forwarded me a text from my mother. "We deserve an invitation. He needs to stop acting like a victim." That message burned into my brain. After all this time, no apologies, no admission of wrongdoing, only demands. My father even threatened to show up anyway if I didn't send them official invites. He bragged about how he helped raise me. So how could I exclude him from something so significant? The nerve of it was astounding. My sister, the root cause of the entire meltdown, also tried to reach out, leaving me a voicemail dripping with insincere charm. "Hey, long time no talk. Heard you're getting married. Let me know if you need family there." She conveniently ignored the fact that her false accusation destroyed my reputation and forced me out of my home. I briefly toyed with the idea of hearing them out until I stumbled upon an all-no my father had written me years ago after the incident. "We don't want your excuses. You brought shame to this family. Don't come back." Rereading that shredded any lingering guilt. They chose their side. They chose to believe my sister's lies over me, and they made no effort to fix it. Even so, tensions grew within the extended family. Some called me childish, claiming I was holding a grudge. Others supported my decision, having never believed my sister's story in the first place. My fiancé and I pressed forward with wedding plans, determined not to let the drama overshadow our joy. But I could sense the storm brewing, a final showdown that would force me to confront my parents and sister once and for all. The confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. One Saturday afternoon, as my fiancé and I were finalizing the seating chart with our wedding planner, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a mutual friend warning me that my parents were on the way to my apartment, uninvited. My fiancé and I exchanged looks, bracing ourselves. Sure enough, they showed up. My father knocked on the door insistently, and when I opened it, Mother stood beside him, arms folded behind him. My sister lingered in the hallway, trying to look innocent. They pushed past me into the living room before I could stop them. "Let's cut the nonsense," my father said, voice booming. "We are related. We have a right to see you get married." My mother nodded fervently. "We raised you. This is a slap in the face," my sister chimed in with a pout. "I've missed you. Can we stop fighting?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. The tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. My fiancé stepped closer. Gently resting a hand on my arm, she whispered, "I'm right here with you." That gave me the strength to stand firm. "You kicked me out for something I didn't do," I stated, keeping my voice level. "You believe her lies?" I pointed toward my sister and made no effort to hear my side. "Where is family loyalty then?" My father looked rattled. "We did what we thought was right. You refused to apologize." I shook my head in disbelief. "Apologize for a crime I never committed." My mother hissed, "Your sister wouldn't lie about something like that." My sister shot me a pleading look, as though trying to feign remorse. But I remembered all too well how easily she spun that story. I took a deep breath. "You ruined my life back then. I was homeless, jobless, labeled a thief. If I hadn't managed to find help from friends, who knows where I'd be." My father tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "Now you want me to pretend none of that happened because I'm getting married. You believe you have the right to attend?" "No, not happening." My sister stepped forward, tears brimming. "I was just a kid. Back then I made a mistake. You can't hold that over me forever." She attempted to reach out, but I stepped back. "A mistake you never owned up to. You let me face all those consequences alone." My mother slammed her hand on the back of the couch. "We are your parents. We brought you into this world." Her voice quivered with anger, or maybe guilt. My father glared, face reddening. "We'll talk to the rest of the family about this. You're choosing to humiliate us?" I felt a surge of anger and strangely confidence. "I'm just standing up for myself. You're the ones who humiliated me for something I didn't do." Then I added the final blow. "If you try to crash the wedding, we'll have security remove you. That's not a threat, it's a promise." Silence hung in the air. My parents looked stunned, as if they never imagined I'd talk back to them like this. My sister's tears turned into an angry glare. She muttered under her breath, "This is so unfair," as if she was the victim. Without another word, my father stormed toward the door, mother and sister trailing behind. Before leaving, father spat, "You'll regret this." Then the door slammed, and they were gone. Over the next few days, the fallout was immediate. Certain relatives bombarded me with calls urging me to just let them attend. Others who knew the truth quietly supported my decision, saying I owed them nothing. My father apparently threatened to call the venue and say I was disowning the family, hoping the manager might intervene. It was a foolish bluff. The venue had no reason to meddle in personal disputes. My fiancé and I pressed on, determined not to let this drama overshadow our big day. The wedding day arrived, a simple, heartfelt ceremony in a cozy garden setting. My friends, supportive relatives, and her family gathered to celebrate. We exchanged vows, tears of joy in our eyes, and stepped into a new chapter of life together. Not once during the ceremony did I glance over my shoulder, fearing a gate-crashing incident. We had a couple of trusted friends watching the perimeter just in case, but my parents and sister never showed. They must have realized I was serious about security. Instead, they spent the evening calling and texting family members complaining about how I'd betrayed them. Word spread that mother was inconsolable, father was livid, and my sister was playing the part of the misunderstood sibling, once again. However, none of that drama intruded on our wedding bliss. When the reception ended, my wife and I left for our honeymoon, a sense of peace washing over us. For once I felt free. No guilt, no second-guessing. I stood my ground, refused to let my parents' entitlement overshadow the truth, and I'd honored my own mental well-being. Now, a few weeks later, I hear from mutual contacts that my parents are still furious and humiliated. They ran to anyone who will listen about my disrespect, ignoring the 6 years they left me in the dust. My sister apparently still denies any wrongdoing, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But as far as I'm concerned, they made their choices years ago. I have no interest in rewriting history for their comfort.